And Derbython continues with a handicapping conversation on the two-day pick six at Churchill Downs coming up on Friday and Saturday. Nick Tammaro here, and I'm very pleased I already teased it and said to be joined by two of my handicapping idols. I don't want to say too many nice things about Andy Serling, though. I talked to him enough to not give him a swollen head. But I'm here with Steve Crist and Andy Serling. Steve, will start by welcoming you. This is a real honor for me. Very excited to talk anything involving a pick six with you.
Well, thanks very much.
And Andy, I know you're very much looking forward to the big weekend. I got to view your Derby and Oaks videos, as a little plug for some of the work you've already done, but I'm sure you're just as excited about all these undercard races.
I am. No, it's a fun card. I mean, they're sort of big, wide open races. I mean, all day long. So it seems like it should be some fun.
Yeah, so this two-day pick six is a $1 minimum. It's a 15% takeout, and it is specifically the grade ones being run Friday and Saturday, obviously anchored by the Oaks and Derby. The Oaks, of course, on Friday, the Derby on Saturday. The first leg is going to be the La Troienne, which goes as race 5 on Friday. We might as well get right into it and give ourselves the maximum opportunity to talk about the races themselves. La Troienne is a race that really brings together three of who should be the marquee players in this division, along with a few others that have yet to get going or aren't in this particular spot. And of course, I'm talking about Idiomatic, last year's champion Distaff runner, the winner of the Breeders' Cup Distaff, and a 3-time Grade 1 winner in her own right, as well as Pretty Mischievous, who won the Kentucky Oaks right here under the Twin Spires a year ago, as well as Kijera, who in a way is sort of the outsider, but a very interesting challenger for the top two. How are you going to get this thing started, Steve?
Well, I can't see beyond the top three in this race. I don't think the other four have any chance unless all three of the favorites don't show up at all. I lean toward Idiomatic for a couple of reasons. I think she can be the dominant speed in here. You know, although there are other speeds, she's apparently doing great. I mean, she got the best workout report of anyone on the Oaks card, with an A- work at Churchill this past week. And she's just a lot faster than Pretty Mischievous. I understand that Pretty Mischievous was a 3-year-old last year and she's allowed to improve. But if you look at their figures side by side, it's not even close. So, you know, to me, Idiomatic is an A and the other two are Bs, no Cs.
Yeah, it seems just about that simple. Andy, what did you think?
I don't really have a lot to add to that. I'm always a little worried when a horse like Idiomatic does so well. As a 4-year-old, they come back at 5. There's always that little worry that they won't come back and be nearly as good. But, when I agree with Steve, listen, Darth Vader has the speed to force her. Free Like a Girl has the speed to keep her honest as well. But it just seems like so often in these situations, those kind of horses, their connections don't really want to push the envelope. And they just kind of let horses like Idiomatic do their thing. And unless one of those horses really pushes her, I don't think she's that vulnerable unless she just doesn't show up. And you can't really spend a lot of money and time expecting that to happen. And I'm kind of with Steve with 1A and 2Bs. I think it's interesting that Sajara's trainer, Phil Bauer, won this race last year with Played Hard, who had won the Fall City in her prior start, much like Sajara. But Sajara really has never faced anybody close to this, at least with Pretty Mischievous. You're talking about a horse that faced the best horse in her division, and she ran credibly, and she can improve. So I think she's obviously the most likely upsetter, but I'm not going to be shocked when Sajara steps forward as well. But if Idiomatic shows up, she's probably going to win. I'm with Steve, 1A and 2Bs.
Yeah, it felt to me like there definitely wasn't anything beyond those three in terms of win candidates. I've never had a tremendous amount of affinity for Pretty Mischievous, admittedly, and I thought for a large chunk of 2023 that she was probably going to be better cutting back. And arguably one of the worst races she ran all year was the Test, which ended up being another Grade 1 win for her, unfortunately, with what went on. But it really was one of her more underwhelming performances on the season. I guess I wanted to see Kijera run a little bit better in the Fall City. She ran well, but she was a very, very heavy favorite. She was meeting a vastly inferior field and simply got the job done. And I think for those reasons, like you guys both said, Idiomatic does look like she's probably just a cut above. I do think it's worth noting, just in terms of like a race flow conversation, it felt like Idiomatic did have things her way. Now, of course, horses with her style are often going to have things their way based on her ability to control things on the front end. And without maybe that luxury in a race like the Distaff, where she ended up stalking randomized, she didn't look quite as strong. Now, Brad Cox's barn did not exactly soar Breeders' Cup weekend, and maybe she ended up being the lone bright spot. But I suppose maybe one of the only knocks against her might be that she's probably not quite as effective without the lead.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And honestly, I was not a big Idiomatic fan last year. I mean, I kept trying to beat her, which, turned out to be beating her head against the wall for most of the year. But, she's not like historically fast. I mean, she's kind of barely over 100 by her horse. And, if there were an informed Clariere in this field, I'd be trying to beat her again.
What about an informed randomized, Andy?
Well, I have a bit of an affinity for randomized, and she ran well against her last year. I think we'll see her on Sunday in the Ruffian, and hopefully all these horses will meet up, and probably along with Adair Manor in the Phipps at Saratoga. So that would be pretty exciting.
Yeah, that'll be great. No doubt about it. Well, it's a fun start to the sequence. Let's go to the Kentucky Oaks, which is race number 11 on Friday afternoon. It's going to go at about 5:51 Eastern time. And, I'm interested to hear what both of you have to say. I thought this was one of the more wide open runnings of the Oaks. We've seen some relatively heavy favorites in this race year in and year out, especially some in recent years. But this felt like a race where, I guess Tarifa is going to be a pretty solid favorite, all things considered. But I thought you could make a case for a number of them. Andy, where did you land in terms of a pick six look at it?
I'm actually curious what Steve thinks about how the betting's going to go here, because I think that Tarifa may not be favored here. I'm not going to be surprised when the favorite is Torpedo Anna or even a Ways and Means. Just FYI, her draw hurts a little bit. I'm kind of unimpressed with Tarifa. I won't listen. It depends how big a spread you're going and how much money you're willing to invest in this pick six. But as far as I'm sort of looking at these horses, Tarifa has had very soft trips in smaller fields, and I know she's run good figures. I kind of want to see her do it against tougher horses, and I feel as though Torpedo Anna ran a better race than she did. She's an absolute A for me. Ways and Means is an A for me. I mean, it's no secret that she ran a remarkable race, and if Power Squeeze hadn't sort of run this remarkable, I mean, it's like she got a perfect trip, but sort of improved dramatically. She would have won by over 5 lengths, a ridiculous trip with a 90 buyer. And I think she might be favored here. And I think you can make a case that she would have won the race if she got a normal trip. Just FYI, the draw did her no favors. Pretty Mischievous did win this from post 14 last year. But I thought she ran well and not better than Leslie's Rose. But I would prefer her stepping forward in this. And we kind of missed the boat with Leslie's Rose last time at 9-1. I don't think Where's My Ring's impossible, but I'd be more inclined to have, depending on what you want to spend, Torpedo Anna and Ways and Means as A's, and Just FYI as a B, and A if you can afford it. And depending on how much you can spend, Leslie's Rose and Tarifa somewhere lower in my play, and I'd like a C with Where's My Ring. But I think it's a very competitive race at the top, and I'm also interested in what Steve thinks, how he thinks is going to be bet.
I think Tarifa's going to be favored. I don't think Torpedo Anna has much of a constituency. She really hasn't run against, horses that people have heard of. And, her figure's a touch below some of the others. So I think she's going to be about the 5-1 that she is on the line. I think this is an unusually good group and an unusually strong Oaks. I think that any of Tarifa, Ways and Means, Just FYI, and Leslie's Rose, these are all pretty nice 3-year-old fillies. They're probably my 4 A's. I kind of wish Candide had gotten in, and I mean, it'll take 2 defections to get her in. I think 20-1 is a silly price on her, and she could be competitive with these. But I'm going to go deep in here with the 4 I mentioned, and Candide I'll add if she gets in.
Yeah, I think that's going to be how most people approach it. And I won't make any comment on Candide's morning line or anybody's morning lines for that matter. It's something I should probably steer clear from. But I agree with everything both of you said. I don't have terribly much to add. I do think Tarifa will end up being favored when push comes to shove. There is a lot of affinity for Torpedo Anna, but I don't know if it's quite enough. And, when push comes to shove, I think the public gravitates towards those higher buyer speed figures when making ultimate decisions. And Tarifa does look a little faster on paper. I kind of joked all winter that she just looked like a slightly faster version of Wet Paint, but she's a much better horse than Wet Paint. I mean, I was being a little flippant in making that comparison. She's run better, I think, than Wet Paint did up to the Oaks part, at least from a speed figure perspective. Maybe Wet Paint just really took to Oaklawn, but that's somewhat irrelevant as far as this conversation goes. I thought, and you both mentioned Ways and Means. I thought Ways and Means' performance in the Gulfstream Oaks was quite possibly the best effort by a 3-year-old filly. In fact, I think two of the better efforts by 3-year-old fillies on the trail to the Oaks were actually her effort in defeat and Just FYI's effort in defeat in the Ashland, respectively. Steve, what do you think about Ways and Means' chances in particular? And was she hurt by the outside draw? Do you not really find yourself terribly concerned about that? How much do you think she can move forward in here as well?
Oh, I fully expect her to move forward. I mean, she was, coming off a long layoff and, had a horrendous trip and should have won the race. I can't imagine her doing anything except moving forward in this spot, second off the layoff. And I really don't care about the post positions.
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing. Andy, anything to add to that?
I just think there's a little bit of underappreciating Torpedo Ann. I thought her race at Oaklawn was extremely good. She was wide the whole way. I know it wasn't that good a field, but she was very impressive in winning it. And, I guess, listen, if she's 5-1, I almost be compelled to bet her over Ways and Means. To be honest with you, I thought she'd be shorter than that. We'll see. But, she and Ways and Means are just clearly my top two.
So an opportunity, I think, for both of you to go a little deep, at least in this Oaks, with it being such a competitive race. And it is definitely one of the more competitive races, I would say, in the 2-day sequence. Well, let's head to Saturday. Leg number 3 of this wager is going to be the 6th race on Saturday afternoon. That's the Derby City Distaff at 7 furlongs. And speaking of matchups in particular between two horses, there are other contenders undoubtedly, but I don't know who's not excited about the rubber match between Vava and Alva Star. The two prior races that they've met up in, I should say, were both riveting, including that Madison last month over at Keeneland. And I can't wait to see how they stack up, not only against each other, but in here with some real competition. I think this is a race that I'd be underselling some of the other horses in it by only talking up those two. But it is definitely those two and everybody else, no doubt about it. Steve, where did you land in the Derby City Distaff? Is it these two, or do you think you have to go a little bit deeper?
Well, it's these two, but then I have two goofy horses who I'm also going to use because I do think this race has the potential to fall apart a little bit late. So there are, a couple of deep closers who I think if the race sets up that way and falls apart, who could be involved at big prices coming from way out of it. Those being Sterling Silver, who she ran a couple of races last fall in New York that hold up to scrutiny, to the figures that she got, in the mid to high 90s. Third time off a layoff, maybe this is the day for her, and I think she's going to be every bit of the 15-1, and probably not to beat all three of them, but I think Flying Connection's a real horse, and I think that she's a little interesting on the turn back from the 2-turn races, and again, if it is falling apart late, I think she's going to be closing at 7 furlongs, and at a big price, I'll use her, but sure, the two favorites are the likeliest winners.
How about you, Andy?
Scott Fincher has good turnback numbers, by the way, Steve, with Flying Connection. He's 23% with 120 starters with $2.01 ROI. So he's good.
Right. So you looked that up because you like her a little bit.
I think she's a little interesting. I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the thing. I try to make Sterling Silver. I think I understand what you're saying. I wish she had more than just one race, but I've always kind of liked her. Baba, listen, Alva Star and Baba are very clearly the two horses to beat. You don't need any of the geniuses up here to tell you. I think the horse that's interesting would be my other use, who I would probably have 2 A's and a B, is Red Carpet Ready. Because you look at Red Carpet Ready's last race, because she drew inside, she was forced to be part of the pace. And I don't think she's really has to be. In fact, I know she doesn't have to be that kind of pace horse. And by drawing post 9, she gets into that stalking position that Vava can be in. Now, Vava may just be better than her, and I'm not convinced she isn't. But it is, third start off a layoff. She ran a big race in her return race, Red Carpet Ready. Not a great dynamic for her last time. Now she's third off a layoff, a better post. And I think we're going to see the very best of her here. I don't know that the very best of her is good enough to beat both of those horses, but I do think the Red Carpet Ready is going to run a lot better here than some people might think. And to me, she's the third horse. She's probably the third or fourth choice anyway, so I don't think it's a brilliant idea, but I think her post makes her usable.
Yeah, it felt like she was definitely disadvantaged by being inside last time out, and Luis Saez did pretty much all he could do to put her into the race early and try and get some position. But yeah, she definitely made out much better at the post position draw. I actually picked Serling Silver in here. I know it's probably goofy. It's probably a little much. I also don't love that she tried to make the entirety of that move on the inside last time. And I'm not saying there was some big dead rail at Keeneland that day, but for the most part at Keeneland, everybody moves 2 paths wide or wider, and Javier really glued her to the inside down the stretch. She's going to need things to get really wonky, and ultimately, I'll use her with other horses in the pick 6. I'll probably play her in the verticals in more of an underneath type of capacity because her ceiling might be just getting a minor placing. But I wonder, and this is probably me just imagining things, but when horses like Alvastar that are super fast end up winning races like she did last time, the connections often become seduced into thinking, well, we can sit off the pace. I wonder if that could actually be problematic for her moving forward, because her weapon is speed, right? I mean, she needs to just go right from the start. Now, look, she's a really quality filly, and that's why she won last time out. I just wonder if maybe she's the one that I can somehow knock out of the exacta and get Vava and Sterling Silver into it. And get a little bit better number, because I think Vava is the better of the two. It's not by much. I also think she stands to really move forward second off the layoff, and I think she's going to be running over a racetrack that in general is a little bit more conducive to horses making off the pace moves, because the main track at Keeneland, we all talked about it through much of the first few weeks, was very heavily tilted towards speed. This was one of the races where horses did actually come from a little bit off of it.
I do think, though, that Alvastar ran a better race last time, because she was wide the whole way and attacking the pace that did fall apart. And Vava was kind of big. I don't disagree. I think Vava might be a little bit better. It's close. I'm kind of a big Alvastar fan, but it's 7. I do think Alvastar may have a bit of an edge too. Second off a layup.
I think that's fair. Steve,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Steve?
No, I agree. I think Vava is a little bit better. The rail. I mean, I understand what you're saying about Red Carpet Ready will do better not being on the inside, but boy, I think that the Hurricane Birdie, the figure is too high, knocking it down by 5 points, and all those horses, Red Carpet Ready, Olivia Darling, Spirit Wind, they're just not in the same ballpark as the 2 favorites.
That's fair, but I think you could also then go back and make the argument that Red Carpet Ready didn't even have a second half of the season last year, so maybe she's a horse that still has a chance to make that upward move. I don't think she's a likely win candidate, but I think she'll run a lot better. She'll be closer to them, but it's a big gap to close regardless, even if I'm right about all that stuff.
A year ago, Red Carpet Ready scored an upset win over a horse that many thought were invincible coming into the 8 Bells and Money's Gold with a pretty strong performance. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to me to see where Red Carpet Ready stacks up against these two, because the best version of her has been good enough to contend with them.
Maybe she likes Churchill. I know that's an angle Steve and I are very big on.
Does she also should be able to run on turf, right? Because turf horses like Churchill.
Right, exactly. Well, then maybe they should run all the turf races on the dirt, because it might actually be more of a turf course than the turf course, but that's another discussion.
Our encore performance here will be a tight turn at Pimlico conversation, but I'm sure they'll yank us off stage before that. Anyway, that's the Derby City Distaff, which in addition to being part of the pick 6 sequence is also a really fun and interesting race. The next leg in the sequence is going to be race number 10, the Churchill Downs, which, it's probably not one of the historically great versions of the Churchill Downs, and I don't have to necessarily say much more than that, but it is a competitive and relatively deep field. Andy, where did you see yourself leaning in this affair?
I like Classic Causeway. How he's in here, right? I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys think about this race, because I'm not sure. I feel like this is a race where the three of us could have very different opinions, or we look at a lot of horses. I was wondering how the Oakland horses would do, and I noticed, like, looking at just today's results, and it's just one day, they sure did pretty well today at Churchill. And I wondered about horses, and some of them are horses that did not race like all winter long, if running all winter at Oakland could have a deleterious effect switching to Churchill. If it doesn't, it's funny, like, Trackmate is a real now horse, right? He's kind of the horse coming in here in the best form. Is it possible he's just gotten better? Even Gun Pilot's been okay in his recent races. I don't love to twist at 7 furlongs, so I'm not really clear what to do with them. I mean, the 2 horse, the problem is there isn't a lot of pace in here, but I just don't like the speed horse Hoist the Gold. I just think he's all dressed up for all the wrong reasons. I think he had a really tough campaign coming in from Saudi, running in these tough races, going longer, fast paces. And his Cigar Mile is such a dressed up performance because of the bias that day that he's going to be bet for all the wrong reasons. So even though he's a low speed, I just don't want him. And Zozos should be forward too. Who's the Zozos we're going to see here? If it's the Zozos we saw in the Breeders' Cup, he has no chance. If the Zozos that ran earlier, he's okay. He's not great, but he's okay. And he's going to take a lot of money here. So I'm kind of trying to figure out who I like. I like 3 Technique. I know that he doesn't have any speed and there doesn't appear to be a ton of pace, but he's a really good 7 furlong horse. I think he's kind of interesting. He drew on the outside. And the other horse I'm trying to make a case for is Ray's Cane, who I might just be insane to like here because of the base dynamic. But the race held together last time. It was a moderate pace. The closers had no chance. He has run some races that are at least close enough to give him a chance in this field. And I just thought second off a laugh, maybe he's a little interesting at a big price. Maybe I have a big affinity for him. So I did well with him last year. But 3 Techniques, the one I like. Race Cane, I'm interested in. And I also think that Track Meet could be a horse that's just sort of the now horse in here. But honestly, if you both had completely different ideas, I wouldn't be surprised. And I'd be curious to hear.
Well,
let's have it, Steve.
I only have X's through 3 horses in this 11-horse field. I mean, I have 8 horses open who I think could win the race. I mean, it's a terrifically competitive race. I don't see any champions in here, but it's a really nice race. If I had to, today say my A's would probably be Zozos, 3 Technique, and I'm sorry, I've always been a Hoist the Gold fan, and while I agree that his Cigar Mile is dressed up, he has plenty of other races on his pedigree. I mean, on his PPs. Beating Nakatomi in the Phoenix last year, puts him ahead of most of these. So I may end up using 7 horses in here, but 6, 9, 11 would be my A's.
Yeah, I actually like Hoist the Gold too. I mean, I know I generally would shy away from a horse whose best race is as dressed up as the Cigar Mile was, but I actually don't think he ran that bad in the Pegasus. I mean, they went extremely fast early. He's not a 1 1/8 horse anyway. I don't love the ship to Saudi and now wondering about how he's going to do. Reportedly, he's been training well. I do think he drew very favorably on the outside. He's got speed. There's not really much speed in it. And I mean, I'd ask, how much better does he have to run than he ran in this race last year? I know he had a very soft trip. It was a very slow pace in the race where Cody's Wish beat him. But I mean, a 98 or a 99 fig is probably winning this race. So that he was at least a horse that I could make a cogent case for, that I didn't sort of have my stomach turn while I was doing it. And there were just a lot in here. I'm also completely against Zozos. I've just never been a Zozos fan. So I don't like Zozos coming from off the pace at 7 furlongs. I don't think that he's fast enough to get the lead at 7 furlongs. I do like 3 Technique. I do like Gun Pilot as well. I think Gun Pilot has that sort of classic Steve Asmussen profile of being a horse that's now kind of taking a step forward at 4, that Steve figured out really what worked best at 3. And I thought his performance last time was very good. Actually, in watching that replay, edge to edge was loaded with a half mile to go. I mean, he felt like when they unleashed him, he was just going to run away from them. And Gun Pilot really stretched him all the way to the wire. So I think it would mainly be 10 and 11 for me. I'd actually, the off the wall horse that I would probably include in here, who's going to be a big price, is Hear My Song. And I wish he had run a little bit better at Turfway last year, but I do think this horse is a dirt horse. He's going to have to run better than he did. He's probably more of a placing chance, but he was one that was at least a bit of a price that I could make a case for. One horse that none of us mentioned that I don't have much affinity for, but I wanted to at least get your opinion on. I know some people like Bo Cruz. I thought the time to get Bo Cruz was 4 weeks ago at Keeneland.
Yeah. Yes. Maybe he's a little like Leslie's Rose in that there's a case that can be made for them, but I just hate these horses that you miss the boat in a much more favorable situation at a very solid price. But I don't know that that's a position you want to be too strongly in the pick 6. I just think he had such a soft trip last time. So he's not impossible, but he's not for me.
How about you, Steve?
I know Andy mentioned him. I am interested in TrackMate because when I first looked at his PPs and I see the 100 buyer last time, my first thought is, oh, they made the figure too high. Let me go back and look at the day. And I went through the day. Honestly, it could have been a 105. I mean, it's a legit huge race. And, maybe he's suddenly that good.
He is a 4-year-old. If he was a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, I just look at it as an aberration. But I had the same feeling. And that's why I say, this is a race that's crying out for a now horse, right? It's crying out for the horse that's ready to assert himself on the scene. And if there's a horse in this race that's that horse, it does feel like it's TrackMate. Now, he may run 8th, but he could be that horse that wins this race and pays $17. And after the race, we're all going, 100 buyer going, what were we doing? So I do think he's dangerous.
A son, of course, of teammate who was trained by somebody who you two saw win a lot of big races over the years. I didn't see quite as many, but did enjoy it. And TrackMate, you knew, was a horse that obviously had something go wrong because Wayne would not shelve a horse that ran second to Verifying on Travers Day without there being something very serious. So he's come back a pretty solid animal, no doubt about it. I do agree. I also laugh at the insignificant trouble lines that we see in short comments way too often now. Because if this horse had traffic at the 3/16 pole, I want traffic for every horse I have coming from off the pace in a collapsing race.
It's a significant problem with the charts at Oaklawn. And because I had to cover their races this year, that was a bad thing. But I mean, I constantly watched replays because there's trouble. And in a certain way, you almost give up and it becomes like a boy who cried wolf. There's going to be a trip I'm not going to watch. And part of it, I think, is because, as you know from watching replays there, when they switch as they're coming for home, you fall into a blind spot for a significant portion of the field at a very, very pivotal moment. I don't know what Oaklawn can do about it. I wish they would, but boy, they do write up a lot of trouble for horses that had none.
Yeah, I was looking for something there, and there's nothing there. So it was, he ran very well, though, no doubt about it. It does feel like a horse who's taking a step forward, and Lucas is going to leg up Keith Asmussen, who will be on Just Steel in the Derby a little bit later on in the afternoon. Let's go to the penultimate leg of this 2-day pick 6, which is the Old Forester Bourbon Turf Classic at 1 1/8 miles. Annually, one of my favorite races run on throughout the year, and we've got a really fun group of 11 going postward here at 9 furlongs on the turf. Steve, where are we going?
Well, unfortunately, I have a very unimaginative take on this race, which is that the 11 Naval Power and the 6 I'm Very Busy are just better than these. Maybe you guys can talk me into somebody else, but I just thought they were best with, a little interest as a third horse in Integration. And I just thought the two favorites were the right horses.
Yeah, I mean, a problem with this race, and Naval Power is going to beat me for better or worse, but a problem with this race is that I don't trust form on this turf course. We saw it last year, and I don't see any real reason to think it's going to be different. And that's a concern. My also concern in the same vein is how much to trust the form out of the Maker's Mark, because that was a course that had taken an enormous amount of rain. And I don't know if I really trust it. I thought Integration had a massive excuse in there. He was wide the entire way and out of position, whereas Naval Power just got a very, very soft trip. And the problem is that Naval Power's prior form was pretty dubious. So unless he's one of these Godolphins that suddenly turned into a world beater, I don't want to bet him based on just that race. Can he win? Of course he can win. Do I want him? Not really. I do want Integration. I agree about I'm Very Busy. He's been terrific in his last couple races. I don't know where it came from, but he has certainly come to hand and he has to be used. And I'm going to use Program Trading because think about this races. There's absolutely no speed, and the speed is a horse that's just badly overmatched. It never surprised, and there's just no reason that Program Trading can't be sitting second. And both he and I'm Very Busy, I think you're going to see I'm Very Busy much more forward here as well. And I think that's going to bode well for them. And the other horses I looked at using were Farbridge, who has races that, can improve off that 3-year-old form. His return race was not good, but he could improve off it. I'm always going to look at Web Swinger, but I've had about enough with him. And to a lesser extent, Never Explain, who's probably a cut below. But all 3 of those horses are dramatically slow in a paceless race. And one thing I think we saw in a number of these races where the forward horses were somewhat dominant on this course in a lot of situations. So I kind of want to be more forward than that. So I'm 156.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that last year's version of this race probably was more indicative of what was going to go on than 2 years ago, considering Santine won it and ended up being a kind of a bad dirt horse in the end of his career. Last year, at least up to the mark, won it. But I agree. I mean, what happens on this course over the last 2 years since they installed it has really not duplicated itself anywhere else. So we could end up seeing a winner that doesn't go on to do terribly much. My naval power take is, and I'm probably somewhere directly between the two of you, I'm not going to let him beat me, but I'm also not going to go out of my way to use him. I do fear all of these Charlie Appleby horses. That's really not an angle. I do think breaking slowly from the gate did hurt this horse a little bit because he was supposed to be forward, but then it ended up being a collapsed race. So that was what, when he broke as slowly as he did, I thought to myself, well, Master of the Seas might be in real trouble because I feel like this horse was definitely in there to inject some pace into it. I'm not saying he was a rabbit. I think the job was that he was going to be forwardly placed. He was going to make sure they went quickly enough. Master of the Seas ended up being so much better than all of them that it didn't really matter. And again, the two horses who kind of contested the pace, as I throw pens around in my office, that contested the pace ended up setting the table well enough. I don't know where I'm Very Busy's last two races came from. And you know, Andy and I were talking about this the other night because he had a very good trip in the Pegasus, but he did run extremely well. And this horse was clearly a cut below a horse like Integration throughout much of 2023. But then he came back and just deep sixed those horses at Fairgrounds in a really impressive performance. So I definitely fear him way too much to take any kind of critical approach. But I picked program trading. I've always liked program trading. I felt like he was a horse coming out of 2023 that probably had a real opportunity to move forward. We've seen Chad do well with these kind of horses off this type of layoff. He won this race, or at least one half of it, with domestic spending back in 2021 in a dead heat in a race where he was definitely the best. So I also think, as you alluded to, pace-wise, he seems to be in a pretty favorable scenario. You mentioned Far Bridge, Andy, and he's a horse who missed very narrowly over this course in last year's American Turf. I do, as you said, I wish he had run a little bit better last time. Or do you at least believe that Christoph is a guy that could have just really had his eye on some of the later season objectives and maybe sent him out there just to get some conditioning?
Well, I mean, I think they really needed to win, especially as they just retook over his training.
Right.
I think the positive in his last race is he seemed to behave himself better because he's been a horse that needs to be on the inside, and that could be a little dicey on this course at Churchill, as we know. I think we've seen a lot of races where you wanted to be off the rail on this turf course, so that worried me. So I thought he behaved better. He beat some bad horses, but he was good enough last year. And I think the question is, you know, how do you feel about Far Bridge and program trading as horses that can improve significantly off their 3-year-old form? There's no reason they can't. If I'm Very Busy could take this step forward, why can't they?
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. Steve, looking at the two favorites that you picked, which obviously they're horses that make a lot of sense, how did you think the pace was going to shake out in this race? And did you think that either of them are both tractable enough to be close enough to overcome what could be a slower pace?
Yeah, I that really didn't concern me. You know, I get the question in my mind with, you know, Far Bridge and program trading and Web Slinger. Was that a really weak group of 3-year-old turf horses last year? I think it may have been. Now, as we keep saying, they're all eligible to improve at 4, but I wasn't real impressed with any of them.
Yeah, the benchmark in that division feels in a way like it was Integration, but we've not gotten the Integration we expected in his last 2 starts. So,
well,
I mean,
he had a bad ride down in the Pegasus, and
yeah,
I think he had a total no-shot trip on that course that had taken so much rain that I think it's not fair to be too hard on him this first 2 races this year.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with how he ran at Keeneland and how he ran at Gulfstream, in large part because I don't concern myself much with turf form at Gulfstream because what happens at Gulfstream in many ways stays at Gulfstream, but on both surfaces. But I see the Maker's Mark a little bit differently than you. I agree with you. He didn't have an ideal trip. I wish he had kind of picked up Shrill Spite a little bit late. You know,
That's fair.
I think he could have run a little bit, but I also went into 2024 really excited about Integration, right? He looked like He won the Hill Prince by 5 lengths. He beat Program Trading second time out. You feel like this is a horse from Shug with 3 starts. He's going to do nothing but move forward, and he's just kind of been him.
That's fair.
Right? And maybe that version of him in this race is actually good enough because, this isn't a group of world beaters. We probably likely don't have an Eclipse Award winner in this field like we did a year ago. So it ends up being another.
The horse who won last year was about as dominant as you could be against his competition in that division. He was.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the better performances in this race that we've seen in years, and we've certainly seen some good ones. And I mean, anyone else?
Yeah, if they hadn't retired him, I'd like him in this spot.
I thought there was a lot of discussion by his owner about running horses more, but we won't get into that terribly much. It seems like a dead end. On to the Derby. After this Old Forester Turf Classic, we'll have the Derby about an hour and a half later, and we're going to talk a little bit, a good bit about the horses that we think are contenders as far as the pick 6 goes, but in general about some in addition to that. So, Andy, you're up first. Where are you going in the Derby? We know a little bit about your pick from your video the other day, but for that plus pick 6 purposes, where are we going?
Well, everybody's watched my video. Why does anybody even need to hear what I have to say?
YouTube's almost down from all the views you got.
It's hard. It's hard, who you want, how do you use them in a pick 6? And that's a better question for Steve than it is for me, to be honest. As I made my picks, I was going to pick Honor Marie, but every time I turn around, everybody liked him. And I just thought, originally thought he'd be 20-1. Then I realized he's going to be closer to 10. And I just thought he might not be a great value play at that. I do like his chances in there. I think, as I explained in my video, the domestic product, who may absolutely end up being woefully slow, but to judge him on 2 races that were run like turf races and judge him on a final figure basis on those races, to me is ludicrous. If he had gotten faster paces, what could he have done? Now, I don't know. Maybe he couldn't have run better, but he is the lone underexposed horse in this race, and he has improved. So I picked him at a price. Yeah, I'm a little biased. I want him to do well, but he's training very well with Sierra Leone, who's going to be, in my opinion, way too short a price, even though he is going to be tough. And here, in theory, I don't care about his post. I think he just drops back. So I'm probably kind of Sierra Leone and Honor Marie and domestic product is my big 3. I do think you have to have fierceness somewhere. He is a horse I very much want to play against in the race. But if you get alive in this pick 6 and you got 1 or 2 decent prices in there and you miss it because you left fierceness out, to me that's kind of dopey because he is the best horse in the race. I will say he drew well outside the speeds until Epic Ride got in, and Epic Ride getting in is not good for him because from that post they have got to go with Epic Ride. So now he has a speed outside of him, and you've got a horse inside him and outside him whose riders have to be aware that fierceness is potentially vulnerable if they give him a little nudge coming out of the gate. So there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about him, but he is the best horse. So I would want to have him somewhere depending on what you can spend. We can all go back and forth this race a bit. There are a lot of horses near that I think aren't impossible. I don't know how you get them on the tickets. I don't think Catching Freedom's impossible in here. I don't think that Just Steel is impossible in here. I think Just a Touch might turn out to be the second most talented horse in this group. I don't like him in this race. I think he's rushed along. I know Mage was rushed along and won, but the history of horses being rushed along too early in this race isn't good, and he's a potential pace casualty. As far as Forever Young, I can understand having him somewhere, but the performances over the years or the underperformances of horses that have tried to go from Dubai to the Derby is so extreme that I just kind of want to let him beat me. But once again, you're spending a lot of money depending on how you play. Where do you fit him in there? So those are my main 3 with fierceness as a, just in case situation. But I'm curious how Steve would put it together as well as who he likes.
Well, one of the nice things about having all these multi-race options, the 2-day pick 6, the pick 6 on Derby Day itself, the late pick 5 ending with the Derby, you don't have to play them all the same way. And in this 2-day pick 6, I'm going to do something that'll probably horrify you both in the Derby. I'm only using 2 horses, and they're the 2 favorites. To my mind, Fierceness has as big an edge on his competition as I've ever seen in a Kentucky Derby. It's not close. They're like 2 different breeds of horses. Now, there's no 100% guarantee he's going to run his Breeders' Cup Juvenile or his Florida Derby again. If he does, this isn't a competitive race at all. And, we had so many years and decades of losing favorites in the Derby and blown Triple Crowns that I think so many people begin handicapping the Derby by going, well, we got to beat Fierceness. He's the favorite. And he's Pletcher. And to me, if this were, a 10-horse field on a Thursday afternoon, he'd be 4-5. I could even argue that 5-2 or 3-1 is a very generous price, because if he shows up, he wins, and it's not even close. And honestly, with the rest of them, I think Sierra Leone is better than them. I don't get the enthusiasm for Just a Touch, who I don't think wants any part of a 1.25 miles. And Sierra Leone, fast-paced, ran by him like he was standing still. I don't know how you can watch the stretch of the Bluegrass and go, oh, next time Just a Touch is going to hold him off or pull away from him. So, on Derby Day, I'm playing a late fit 5. I'll use the same 7 or 8 other possibles as C's in case I get that far. But I feel like it's about 60% that one of the 2 favorites is going to win this Derby.
Why are you not concerned at all about the fact that 2 times things haven't gone perfectly for Fierceness, and he just basically ran like crap? And this is a trainer who's had horses run enormous races at Gulfstream that have a history of not necessarily running back to them, particularly in the Kentucky Derby, where, he's run a lot of overmatched horses, but he's like 2 for 59. And his 2 winners are pretty aberrant horses.
Yeah, but also if you just look at his horses who are, 10-1 or less, 7 of the last 8 or 7 of the last 10, I don't remember the figure, have run first or second. It's not like he keeps bringing horses to the Derby who, blow up. Obviously, it's concerned with Fierceness because of the 2 terrible races. I'm not trying to justify him as a 1-5 shot. I think as a 5-2 shot, he has a higher percentage to win than those odds suggest.
What about the fact that there's a very good chance he's sitting 3rd or 4th in a pretty quick pace?
Why is that a problem? He sits 3rd or 4th outside of bad speed horses. The idea that, Epic Ride is going to determine the outcome of the Kentucky Derby. So what if he's in front of him for a while? I think Fierceness is going to sit 3rd or 4th on the outside, take over at will. And, look, maybe he doesn't want the last furlong and, they start closing the gap on him. But the fact that he's going to be 3rd or 4th with some other cheap speeds in the race doesn't bother me at all.
Okay. We disagree. But, no, I firmly agree with you, though, that he is the most talented horse and it's not close. I completely agree with you on that. If you could boil them down and they had a talent jar, his jar would be much, much more full than the other ones. I don't think there's any argument. His 2 good races crush these horses, assuming he runs at 1.25 miles.
And one of the reasons that I can't, really come up with any other smart alecky closers is that I'm very negative on the Louisiana Derby. I think with that weird distance they now run it at, where they run 3 races the entire meeting at. I think the figure is very suspect. And races where the first 8 finishers all run new career tops, I think the figure is too high. So I'm against that race. I think those horses are going to be overbet. And I just couldn't find another clever horse. For emergency, super backup purposes. I know the record of horses coming from Dubai, but that horse isn't terrible.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's probably at least there was just a lot, I guess part of what I've been remembering is that there was just so much conversation about Dermis Otagake last year that I think people are a little fatigued from him having lost. But look, he ended up proving to be, he was a pretty good horse with his 2nd place finish in the Breeders' Cup Classic a little bit later in the year. I guess, the best way I could describe it is that what we know about Fierceness is that his best and Andy kind of alluded to this a minute ago, his best is a lot better than anybody else's best in the race. I think the horses that you're supposed to be looking for are the ones that we maybe haven't seen their best. I guess that's my best justification for Just a Touch. It's a little bit of a stretch, but he's a horse with only 3 career starts that could be poised to take a little bit of a step forward. I'm sort of, I don't know exactly which way to lean on the Bluegrass, because I think part of it from a race flow perspective is that Sierra Leone made the only meaningful move from off the pace, but it was a very fast pace. No doubt about it.
The only closer than the ability of the race, to be fair.
Right. And I mean, outside of the top 2,
anyway,
no, I mean, but outside of the top 2, are you buying stock in any of those horses in major 3-year-old races this year? I mean, no way. Right. And Dornock's not moved forward at all, which was not surprising. And, Epic Ride's a nice grade 3 type horse. There are some derbies out there. They're just not running Kentucky. So, with that said, I guess what I'm saying is that you're probably making that kind of case for everybody else. I agree. And in fact, I said to a friend the other day, if this was an average race on a Thursday afternoon, Fierceness would be sub even money in this race based on his figure advantage. I mean, he has a massive figure advantage. However, the trip handicapper, the race flow handicapper, and all of us wants to say this is a horse who's been exceptional when things go his way, and he's been mediocre at best when they don't, one of which was in the slop. But again, he broke his maiden in the slop, so I don't think that is part of the excuse. I do worry ultimately that him being on a 3 to 4 wide chase in a relatively fast-paced race could be a little too much for him. At the same time, I'm not going to be surprised if it's not. Right. I'm not going to be surprised if he just sits there and moves when ready and goes on with it.
You mentioned Just a Touch. And, I think there's a chance by the end of the year he ends up being very, very good. If you're trying to beat Fierceness, don't you kind of want to do it from a horse coming from behind, though? Do you want to do it with a horse with a similar type running style? He's going to run, the same kind of position as Fierceness and beat him. I guess it's Fierceness when Fierceness fails to run, but I just don't buy it.
Well, I think you and I had a conversation about Life is Good in the Breeders' Cup Classic a few years ago, because I said, I was thinking about what price to make him on the morning line. I said, I think he's 100 to 1. I can't make him that, because how is he going to put away Flightline and then hold off all the closers, right? Like, how is Just a Touch going to sit behind Fierceness, get past him, and then hold off the likes of Sierra Leone and even Catching Freedom, or even mid-range horses like Mystic Dan, who I think is a horse that's largely been forgotten in this race, who I don't necessarily think he can win, but I certainly don't think he's bad.
He was bad last time. He won with a big figure, with a big bias trip back. But I don't disagree that there's something about him that says he could run well in here.
He's also, as long as it's not a day where there's a massive disadvantage to being inside, he's going to save a ton of ground, because he's breaking from the 3 with a guy who wants to put him on the rail. So, I don't, that's obvious. That's actually a feather in his cap, I would say, but he seems like a reach on the win end.
Where are you on Steve's opinion on the Louisiana Derby? Because I kind of agree with him philosophically. The reason I like Honor Marie a little more was that I think he may have run the better race, and that he moved earlier and was wider, kind of like Mage versus Forte in last year's Florida Derby. But I'm not sure that I totally disagree with Steve. I definitely don't totally disagree with him. How much I disagree with him, maybe that Louisiana race is that good. Where are you on that race, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly like the Louisiana Derby form. I don't really love necessarily Catching Freedom style for this race. I think if I'm going to take a deep in the pack closer, obviously I'd be much more inclined to take Sierra Leone. But I think Catching Freedom ran relatively well. I agree. The figure looks like it could be a couple points high. It's funny when this race was extended to 1 mile 3/16, it has actually led to like very dichotomous runnings of the race in terms of how they unfolded. We had horses go wire to wire a couple of times, and we had horses come from deep in the pack a couple of times. So it's kind of been, a little bit of both. Honor Marie is a horse that I just feel like too many people are on right now. And the difference in price between him and Catching Freedom is supposed to be more significant if you like Honor Marie, right? The angle is right. The angle is I want to take Honor Marie at 3 times the price. As far as a pick 6 conversation goes, if you liked one, I don't know. You have a clever opinion potentially on Raise Cane. We have clever opinions on Serling Silver. If somehow both of those horses were to win, I don't know if you'd want to lose the pick 6 because you threw out a logical horse that your horse may not have run that much better than, unless you're, of course, taking a stand like Steve is with just 2 horses. I think you'd want to be careful about differentiating between those 2 in the pick 6. But as far as vertical wagering goes, I mean, you'd want Honor Marie at 3 times the price of Catching Freedom.
One last thing to add about the horse from Dubai, the Japanese horse. Unlike some of the others that have failed, he's not a speed horse. And maybe that's a little bit more in his favor, too. Maybe the others were speed types that just weren't able to get their trips as well. Not that I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Derma Sotogake also didn't really get to a forward position last year that I think he wanted to be. He got bounced around a little bit early. He did ultimately kind of prove he was a horse that was a little bit better coming from off of it. I think part of the problem too is the UAE Derby more often than not is run with an extreme inside bias. All right, we've seen some incredibly exaggerated performances since that race moved back to dirt, and we saw horses get bet off of it. I mean, Derma Sotogake is one example of that, but over the years we've seen a little bit of it. Steve, you mentioned him a little bit. Obviously, you're not keen on using Forever Young in the 2-day pick 6, but he is a horse that you could see yourself using maybe as a backup in the pick 5.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he'd be my 4th or 5th choice or something like that, because I just think there's so many completely uncompetitive horses in the race.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, look, he's. I know Andy loves the phrase "he's done nothing wrong." I mean, literally, he's done nothing wrong. He's won every start. So
it's a euphemism for he's not very good.
He's not very good, and I don't have a nice way to put it. So I'm going to say it's
slow. He's won 2 slow races, therefore he's done nothing wrong. But I don't think that's the case with Forever Young. I wish he had prepped a couple times in this country because I'd like to see what he did here, and I think he is a really good horse.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him take a step forward after this race as well. It's just a hard thing to ship that far and be successful. But I will say the way the Japanese have sort of taken over a lot of the major races across the globe, it's around the globe, I should say. You'd have to think that there's a pretty decent chance they're going to find a way to at least get in the money in this race relatively soon. But winning it, I think, might just be a little bit outside of this horse's scope, but undoubtedly one to really contend with. Anybody else? I guess, this conversation obviously is mainly on the pick 6, and Andy picked a couple of horses that are going to be relatively big prices. How do you think you'll approach the Derby? Let's say, of course, best case scenario, we're talking perfect world, Steve. You're alive in the pick 6. How are you going to bet the race itself?
Well, it really depends what if I'm alive in the 1-day pick 6, the 2-day pick 6, and the late pick 5. I mean, at that point, it's a pure hedge situation of, who didn't I use anywhere, who I think can beat me. I'm not going to press my opinion if I'm alive in 3 different multi-race bets.
Not doing a buyer, making a 3-horse exacted try box.
Right. 5-horse box and a 6-horse field. You know what happens.
Yeah, I that certainly makes a lot of sense. I mean, I could say that obviously there are different prices these horses are going to be. There's very little money in the pool right now, but as least as I think I saw was 65,000 in the pool. Both Sierra Leone and Fierceness were 7-2. And honestly, I don't think they're going to move terribly far down off of that. I think we're going to see one at the 3-ish range and the other around 7-2 because the public is still pretty married to making sure they don't let a long shot get by.
The one horse we didn't mention who I would use somewhere as a C. I think Just Steel is better than most of these horses. I think he might be the 5th or 6th best horse in the race. He's not impossible. If you like the effort in Arkansas, fleet-wise, comes up better than most of this field.
I was going to say beforehand, Steve, would you please weigh in at Just Steel? Because I know you're using him somewhere, though I agree with you. I agree. He's a cool overachiever. He feels like a very good horse to get 3rd or 4th too, if you're betting on tries or supers, maybe even better. But I think he's a very good horse to outrun his odds in here. He's a cool horse. And his one bad race was 3 weeks after he ran the Southwest when they moved the race. So I think you can give him a bit of an excuse for that race, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say he's also a very good horse to bet in the Preakness future because as long as he comes out of the Derby sound, he's going to the Preakness. So you're going to have to
future.
I mean, I would say that
the Derby future, the Clark. There's a whole lot of races.
Get some action on how many races he will run remaining in 2024. I'd go over 5.5 for sure. So it'll, the good thing about Wayne is he likes to run them. So good mention, of course, of Just Steel, who's a horse who's at the very least has done some good things this year. He's one I wouldn't have bet anything on him going long at all when the year started, but he's been a good training job on Wayne Lucas's part. And it is fun to see Keith Asmussen getting a mount first time around. I also think it would have been long odds that Keith's first Derby mount was not for his dad. But
one thing I'd say about Keith, and betting him, and I think he rode well at this isn't a criticism. If the rail is good, Keith likes the rail. So, if the rail's good, Keith might be good. If the rail's not, I'd be worried about Keith being on the rail because he does like to save ground. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I think the improvement on him from the beginning of Oaklawn last year, the end was enormous. And from there to here is just incredibly large.
Yeah, he's definitely improved a lot, no doubt about it. Seems to find his way into good positions pretty often. And I know it was a good moment at the trainers' dinner earlier tonight when they asked Steve about Keith being in there. So a lot of fun. Of course, a jockey-laden family. I think most people are a little surprised to hear when they don't know it ahead of time that Steve was a jockey also. It was a long time ago, but I can make jokes like that. Gentlemen, anything else to add on the two-day pick six or anything that we didn't touch? I think we covered just about every base.
Thanks for having us.
Indeed.
No, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in to join us. This is part of Derbython, 24 hours of raising money for charities, a lot of handicapping, plenty going into it. Stay tuned for a lot more. A big thank you to both Andy Serling and Steve Crist, who did a tremendous job. Hopefully we put you on a few winners. I'm sure we mentioned them at least. Let's hope we're actually going to bet them and spoke highly of them. So I really appreciate both of you. And thanks to everybody out there. Good luck in the Kentucky Derby, and we'll see you on down the road.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Nick.